The moment the pit bull charged into the backyard, everything seemed to freeze, as though time itself had taken a breath. I remember it all so clearly, how the dog came out of nowhere, its eyes wild, fixated on my husband's knees. She screamed. A piercing, gut-wrenching sound that shattered the air and snapped me into action. Without thinking, I kicked the dog with every ounce of strength I had. The impact was lucky. Somehow, I hit it square in the jaw, and I could feel its grip loosen, even though the scene was chaos. In the distance, I heard my husband shout something, a question, maybe? Whose dog is this? His voice didn't reach me. The world had narrowed down to the struggle I was fighting to keep the children safe. Get the bear spray! I shouted. Panic coursed through me, a wild, frantic energy. I couldn't process how the world had gone from a peaceful backyard to a battleground. I loved animals, but this was different. This wasn't a stray, it was a dog that seemed completely out of control, a rabid force of nature. But looking back, I don't think it was rabid. It wasn't foaming at the mouth, but it was enraged, snapping and lunging with terrifying force. Then, my husband ran. Not toward us. Not to help. He ran out of the gate. Away from us. Away from the chaos, leaving me alone with 2 children. The same children he'd insisted on babysitting that weekend. His niece and nephew. The baby, the infant, was still in an outdoor bassinet, and I had to make a split-second decision. Grabbing her, I tossed the bassinet onto the picnic table to get her out of reach. With my heart pounding in my chest, I hoisted his niece onto my shoulder, praying I wouldn't drop her. The pit bull was relentless. It snapped and lunged, its jaws inches from her, and every instinct screamed at me to get her out of the way. I ran, my short legs carrying me to the barbecue. With trembling hands, I set her there, desperate to keep her safe. The dog kept jumping, its fangs flashing in the sunlight, a terrifying blur. I knew if I moved too quickly, if I tried to run with her, it might get her. I might lose her. I made for the shovel. But the dog chased me, hot on my heels, snapping at my legs. In a rush of adrenaline, I swung it wildly. Again. And again. The weight of the shovel felt foreign, a tool I wasn't used to, but I kept swinging until the dog finally backed off, yelping. I won't forget the feeling, the way the metal bit into the air, the sound of it connecting. The dog snarls. And somehow, in the midst of all that chaos, I didn't even realize the dog had bitten me. Twice! My legs were numb with shock, and all I could think about was keeping them both safe. We didn't speak after that. Not for days. A week passed, and we lived in the same house, yet it was as though we were strangers. I didn't ask where he went after he ran. I didn't care. He came back, minutes later, maybe just long enough to throw us in the car and rush us to the hospital. His anger hit me like a slap. He was angry that I wasn't speaking to him. Angry at the silence I wrapped around myself like a shield. But how could I even look at him? He wasn't there. When I needed him most, he was nowhere. He took off. Left us. Me, with 2 children I didn't even know well, and a pit bull ready to tear through us. He had just run. The bear spray, right inside the door, the one I always keep in my purse for emergencies, was there, but he couldn't be bothered. He knew where it was. And still, he ran. I don't even like kids. I'm child-free by choice, but it wasn't even about that. It was about what had happened. About the fact that I had to step up. I had to protect them. He had promised to help, to babysit. But he hadn't. Not when it mattered. And now, I'm left to ask, is this grounds for divorce? I can't even tell if I want to hear his side of things anymore. The attraction? Gone. The love? Gone. He tried to touch me yesterday, just to move me out of his way, but it felt like he was a stranger. A stranger who didn't even care about what I had just been through. I slapped his hand away before I could even think. And it wasn't like I had to force myself to do it. It was instinct. Because it felt wrong. Now, he just paces, frustrated. Talking at me. Every attempt to engage ends in him getting angrier, getting more distant. He doesn't even understand why I'm angry. I didn't expect him to be a hero, to fight the dog off with his bare hands. But I did expect him to follow instructions, to stay calm in the face of danger, to be there when I needed him. To not leave me in a life and death situation with a toddler and an infant. But is that just panic? Just a moment of fear taking over? Could I forgive him for running away? Or has he shown me who he really is? What do I do now? I keep telling myself to try, to at least attempt to understand, but then I see him. And just like that, the memory of him running hits me again, sharp and unyielding. How could I even begin to move past that? How could I want to be with someone whose first instinct was flight, not fight? Even if it came naturally, I can't forget what I saw. If his niece and nephew had died, would anyone care about his instincts then? Because that's what it came down to, they could have died. And I was left asking, why should he be the one protected? Would I protect him? We're supposed to protect each other, right? That's all I expected from him. Not to take a bullet for me, but to have my back. That's all. It's hard to explain, but I can't stop thinking about it. My friend told me people update often, but I didn't even know how to attach my feelings to the post. I wasn't prepared for how many responses I get, so much kindness, so much support. Honestly, I never imagined this would blow up the way it did. I've been reading every comment, absorbing them, and I have to say, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry to everyone who's been through anything like this. Because this has been hard. My mental health's been a mess, but I finally took action. I got an appointment through an app at work, labeled it high priority because I knew I couldn't keep ignoring it. But it felt like a start, a little spark in a sea of darkness. The therapist, just a video chat, could see how tense I was the second I began talking about it. She noticed how my shoulders would stiffen, how my breath would catch. I didn't even know it was happening. She asked me to try to relax, but I couldn't. I couldn't shake the feeling of his absence. I told my husband I needed space. Space from him. Space from the man I thought I knew. I wasn't as kind as I wanted to be when he argued, refusing to leave. But it was my house. I told him, flatly, that I couldn't look at him, not after what happened. And when he cried, I felt nothing. Nothing but a coldness that scared me. I hated myself for it. But I was so exhausted. So emotionally drained from the therapy session, from everything. I didn't sleep that night. I don't know if it's the fatigue or the lingering shock, but I couldn't rest. Not knowing what had happened. Not knowing if I had done enough. The guilt eats at me, and I haven't even talked to him about where he went after he ran. I couldn't bring myself to. It wasn't just the dog, it wasn't just his disappearance, it was everything leading up to it. I was at the hospital, getting stitches, barely aware of anything around me, but I remember his sister and her husband asking him where he went. I haven't asked him either. I don't know if I ever will. All I know is that his niece just got out of a hospital, and everything came rushing back. I sent flowers, a teddy bear, a toy she had been asking for, but I couldn't bring myself to go to the hospital. I didn't want to make her nervous. Seeing me might remind her of the chaos. But his sister? She sent me flowers too. It broke me. It made me cry all over again, like a damn mess. And then I saw the message from her husband. A long one. I couldn't get through it without crying. The words were so sweet, so sincere, that I didn't know how to process it. They also sent me a $1,000 Visa card. I thought my eyes were deceiving me. The number didn't make sense. But they did it. They're good people, and all I could feel was how terrible I had failed them. How terrible I had failed their daughter. It keeps replaying in my mind, over and over again. Could I have done more? I haven't looked into filing for divorce yet, but I'm not against the idea anymore. I'm not sure if I can even move past this, but I've had time to think. I've had time to realize something. It's okay not to want to be with someone who would leave you behind in a crisis. And I don't want to be with someone who would run. If anything, I want to fight. I want someone who will fight with me. Maybe he's better off with someone who would run beside him. Maybe they deserve each other. I'm not sure what comes next. I'm still a mess. But I'm also relieved to have the space. At least for now. Thank you to everyone who made me feel like I wasn't crazy. It's funny, people say a marriage can't end because of one thing, unless it's something huge like infidelity. But this was big. The betrayal was there, whether it was intentional or not. I don't know when I'll talk to him again. Maybe never. But I'll update if I can. If anything changes. And as for the comments, thank you so much. The parents, his sister and her husband, they're grateful. They see what I did, and they're thankful. They're good people. And that feels like a little sliver of peace. I wish I could do more for them and for the little girl. But for now, I'm just trying to keep my head above water. The morning started out like any other wedding I've been to. Before the ceremony, the bride and groom were all smiles, nervous, sure, but happy. We had brunch while the wedding party slipped away to get ready. It all seemed so ordinary, so typical. At least, that's what I thought. My husband had warned me about some drama brewing before the event. Apparently, the groom's family insisted his ex attend, which caused tension with the bride. The ex was an EMT, she'd once saved the groom's mother's life. But the bride didn't want her there. Still, she gave in. And that, I think, was the first sign things weren't as they seemed. I couldn't know then what would unfold. The ceremony was supposed to happen soon after the brunch, and the reception would follow. But that's not how it went down. The couple had looked happy earlier, excited, maybe a little nervous, but it felt like everything was falling into place. But then, as we waited for the bride to arrive at the altar, an uncomfortable silence stretched on. The music played softly in the background, but it didn't fill the emptiness. Minutes passed. And then, her father walked in. He had the look of someone who just received the worst news. She left, he said simply. The groom stood there, his face twisted in confusion and pain. He was crying. The groom's mother, she was screaming, her voice raw, filled with disbelief. The scene was pure chaos. It felt like time stopped for a moment, and then it all erupted. The reception, which was meant to be a celebration, turned into a disaster. The guests were told to just take boxes of food and go. It didn't matter anymore. Nothing mattered. The bride had disappeared. And no one knew why. At the reunion later, it all came out. The bride explained that the reason she left the groom at the altar was because, at brunch, the ex had told her they'd slept together. And to make it worse, she had proof. She showed the bride a sex tape, a recording of her and the groom. The bride was devastated. She couldn't marry a man who betrayed her like that. But the groom's family? They had a different story. They smeared the bride's name on every social media platform. They weren't going to let this go without a fight. And that's when things got even messier. The groom showed up at the bride's house, trying to explain everything. He swore he hadn't cheated. The sex tape wasn't recent, it was years old. The groom hadn't changed much, so the bride believed it was new. But the ex was lying. She admitted it. The tape was old, nothing recent. She was just trying to tear them apart. To my surprise, though, instead of everyone turning on the ex, they turned on the bride. Her own family was furious with her. They were angry about the money spent on the wedding, about how gullible she'd been. They shouted at her, demanding answers. I couldn't just sit there and watch. I spoke up. I defended her. Of course, I would have believed it too if I saw a sex tape. And on top of that, the bride had been practically forced to accept the ex's presence at the wedding. How was she supposed to know the ex was lying? But my support? It didn't matter. Suddenly, the entire family turned against me and the bride. They were cold, distant. No one was speaking to us. My husband? He was upset, and I could feel it. He was angry because he thought I'd just take anyone's word if they accused him of cheating. But I couldn't see how that was fair. I'd never take a stranger's word over his, but I couldn't ignore what the bride was going through. Later, back at the hotel, I showed my husband a post I'd seen on Reddit. He knew I liked reading there, so it wasn't a surprise. One commenter asked how we were so sure the tape was old. What if the groom and ex were covering up a real affair by lying about the tape's age? At first, my husband laughed, but I could tell the wheels were turning in his mind. Maybe he was starting to question things, just like I had. I left the bride's house early, feeling the tension in the air. My husband stayed longer, trying to help, but I couldn't stand being around the chaos any longer. The groom, despite being exonerated, was still groveling to the bride, apologizing like he was the one who had been wronged. My husband was thrown off by it. This behavior wasn't like the groom. He was the type to be proud, to sit on his high horse. He wouldn't apologize for something he hadn't done. It felt strange. My husband knows him better than I do, and now he's starting to think maybe the groom did cheat. But he doesn't want to bring it up, not with the way things were escalating. I explained to him why I felt like he was being unfair, how he'd assumed I would believe anyone who accused him of cheating. He apologized, admitting he was just stressed. He was upset about the money wasted on the trip, about everything being derailed by a lie. Then I got a text from the bride. She thanked me for standing up for her, for defending her. Some of the slanderous posts had been taken down. But the ex? She was still posting, playing the victim, acting like everything that had happened was everyone else's fault. The groom's mother showed up at the bride's house after I left, furious. She was threatening to burn the place down. She blamed the bride for humiliating her son. The bride had ruined everything, apparently, just to get back at him over a lie. It was a mess. And I'm still trying to make sense of it all. It's been a long, exhausting day. As an afterthought, I wondered, should I show this post to the bride? I'm not sure. I don't know her well enough to put her business online. But at the same time, she might appreciate knowing that most people are on her side. I just don't know if she'll be upset with me for talking about it. I guess I'll just have to wait and see.